What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Gimme presented by Bet365. Why do we call it the Gimme? You guys know why, because it's good. I'm Jason Sobel. He is Spencer Aguiar, and this week we're talking about the Butterfield Bermuda Championship at Port Royal Golf Course on the beautiful island of Bermuda. We're going to talk all about your favorite outrights, props, matchups, first round leader plays, one and done picks, all the stuff we do on this show every single week during the entire PGA Tour season. But first, as mentioned, the Gimme is presented by Bet365. Bet365 does not do ordinary. That's why you get more boosts with them than with anyone else. Every day, they power up the odds on hundreds of bets to give you a chance to win more. Bet365 boosts specific markets, your winnings, and even parlays. And they don't stop there. Keep an eye out for their biggest and best odds with the incredible Super Boost. Check out the boost and see why it's never ordinary at Bet365. 21 or older only, or 18 over in Kentucky and present in Colorado, Iowa, Kentucky, New Jersey, Ohio, and Virginia. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER in Colorado, Kentucky, New Jersey, Ohio, or Virginia, or 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. Terms, conditions, and restrictions, as always, apply. Take a look at the top of the board this week at Bet365. Your favorite is a guy who has never played in this event before. He was in Boston just a day ago, part of the Boston Common Golf team at TGL. Adam Scott is 16-1. Look, Spencer, I'll bring you in here because I don't know that I necessarily want to play Adam Scott. I won't be mentioning him as we get into the show here, but I will say this much. If you're looking at the top of the board, you want to play one of the favorites this week, it's at least a pretty good number for all the favorites, 16-1 to start of the board. I mean, we see guys throughout the year, 7-1, 8-1, 10-1, 12-1 as the favorites of full field PGA Tour events. At least they're giving you a pretty good number at the top of the board.
I'm going to say this, Jason. You'll never hear me say anything badly about a UNLV guy. Like, us UNLV guys have to stick together. So I thought it was an intriguing board, though, from kind of any of those guys that are sub 30-1. Like, obviously, yes, I would agree. Adam Scott is the deserving favorite. He is number one in my model for projected win equity. But I think there's a lot of guys that we can talk about between him, Thomas Dietrich, Ben Griffin, Alex Noren. Like, those are not guys that I put outright tickets on. And I know one of those players you will discuss yourself a little bit later. But you know, I think that they all make a lot of sense. I decided to go a different route with my first play, but it's a good board here. It's an interesting tournament. There are some flaws that I'll discuss in a second, but I like this tournament.
Yeah, as of yesterday when the odds opened, Brendan Todd was in sole possession of second place on that board. I thought that was giving him a little too much respect. Alex Noren and Akshay Bhatia have moved into that spot. They're all at 18-1 right now. Lucas Glover at 20-1. Remember, he won two events not that long ago against stronger fields. And Thomas Dietrich also at 20-1. You mentioned him a second ago. We'll get to him in a minute. But first, let's get to our portfolios. $100 to bet. We're going to start with the outright. Spencer, who's your first?
So I usually come on shows and talk about all the data that my model has uncovered from previous years of an event. Obviously, that situation's a little bit more challenging this week since we don't have Shot League present to pull from when we're trying to maneuver through this board. I do have to say that this venue has some of the most straightforward data needed to find success every single season with the way that I did run some of these numbers. That includes the unexpected shift that you get when diving into the unique contextual experience. So essentially, you're looking at the 6,828-yard venue. You know, Jason, this is probably not the show to give this extensive breakdown. We only have 30 minutes here. I will record my version of links and locks. Obviously, everybody can listen to yours. I'll get a little bit more into the course breakdown there. But essentially, the reason why I find this to be important is you get this shift of the data here where all the hidden distance is baked into four of the par threes that range between 213 to 235 yards. 26.3 to 38% of your bogey or worse rate will come on those holes. That high-end production is really what I am looking for. The par fours and the par fives are where you're going to need to try to find your cut makers. But that big production shift that Alex Smalley got for me at 28-1 for $8 of my portfolio is where I decided to start my card. And, you know, I've talked a lot during the last year about how Smalley's ball striking is elite. Sometimes he doesn't experience the par 5 scoring you need to work up the leaderboard. I will say that sentiment has changed marginally for a golfer who has improved and now finds himself 22nd in this field when it comes to par 5 birdie or better percentage. We can still say that's lacking somewhat when diving into how weak this event is going to be from top to bottom. I just think Smalley's par 4 scoring that placed him ninth, and then his weighted par 3 scoring that also landed inside the top 15 of my model was a much more significant indicator for high-end success than we would receive during most weeks. I would have priced him closer to 20-1. I had top 10 grades for him inside of my sheet for strokes gained total on Bermuda, playability on these short courses, his expected performance in the wind. That's something that we want to look at. And then projected scoring at the venue. I really don't see him being much of a difference from any of the names that I've talked about previously. Kind of thought he was that option that was very much in that Alex Noren, Thomas Dietrich, Adam Scott range, just 10 points higher on the board when we started off this event. So I'm going to go with Smalley and try to find some value there. But as I said at the top, those are all names that I like.
Yeah, I think Alex Smalley makes a lot of sense this week, like you said, for many, many reasons. I'm going to go with the guy near the top of the board who makes sense for a lot of reasons. Alex Noren, I gave you that board and showed you the graphic just a minute ago. He's 18-1 at Bet365 right now. Got in early. He opened at 25-1, and I thought he made a ton of sense at that number. That was a good number on Alex Noren. He's been in form, 3 top 15 finishes in his last 8 starts. He's played well here. Only 1 start. That was the first year they held this event in Bermuda. He finished in a share of 15th place at that one, shot 4 rounds in the 60s. And then the real reason I like him most, there's a little narrative here, and it follows what Eric Van Rooyen had last week. I didn't talk about Eric Van Rooyen on the show, but I did have a little piece of him outright, and he's a guy that I've been talking about a lot over the last month and a half or so. He's been playing well. I like targeting guys, especially in these fall events, who have been world-class players, have sort of lost their games a little bit, kind of fallen back a little, but are starting to show those signs again, and the odds makers haven't really jumped on them. Now, okay, I can make a case that the odds makers have figured out Alex Noren a little bit, especially getting 7 points shorter from where he opened yesterday. But Alex Noren is a guy who was once top 10 in the world, and it wasn't that long ago, played on the European Ryder Cup team. I've been there, done that kind of guy. He knows how to close events, 10 career wins on the DP World Tour, still looking for that first PGA Tour win, almost got in Vegas a few weeks ago. I could certainly see it happening this week, and I love him at 25-1. I still like him at 18-1. I think he's got some value there, Spencer.
I agree with you, and we've talked about this a little bit, and he's a name that I have mentioned on a lot of action shows, and I just want to mention this. There is a clause, I believe, in my Action Network contract that I cannot give out Alex Noren on a show. I think we're getting very close with that same answer with Steven Yeager. So I like Noren play. I'm always going to be a supporter of it. Top 5 projected win equity in my model. Upside climber, great on Bermuda. I think there's a lot to like.
I am going to be so happy if Alex Noren wins this week, not just for my own personal benefit, but because it's maybe the one show of the year you didn't mention his name, and I get to have him instead. I love it.
It's probably going to be fitting. It like the way that Alex Noren has treated me. Like I went all in with him at the Masters. I think anytime that you get these Bermuda properties, and just very quickly on this, like I've talked about this before, put Alex Noren and Ben Griffin on slow Bermuda, and their upside just like massively shifts inside of my sheet. So there's a lot of reasons to like both of those golfers, as I said, even though I don't have plays on them.
All right, where you go with your second one then?
So I'm going to go a little bit further down the board. I'm going to take Brandon Wu at 55-1 for $4 of the bankroll. My model seems to believe that Wu has turned a corner, even though he hasn't located a top 30 showing in his last 9 starts. I'd love it if we could point toward more of those high-end results, since it's not as if 55-1 is a price that is offering forgiveness for the form that he has provided. But I was more intrigued by the 6 straight made cuts that he's produced when you consider the fact that he gets to take on a course that should ideally suit his game. My data placed him 3rd in this field when faced with slow greens of any kind. It's kind of some of the answers I was talking about with Noren there, where you just get upside on these slower surfaces. Wu was 6th for short courses under 7,000 yards, 9th in windy conditions, and 8th for projected par 4 scoring. I think there's a real reason why Wu has posted back-to-back top 35 showings at the property, and it does feel as if he's in a position to deliver again. When we look at the recent stats that appear to be trending better than the results are posting on paper.
little internet connection here. If you guys got me.
Yes, I can hear
Maybe.
you now, Jason.
Oh, we're having issues. Is this working?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, Spencer, I like the Brandon Wu play. Sorry, some technical difficulties. We start talking Bermuda. We get stuck in the Bermuda Triangle over here, and the Wi-Fi goes out. But we're back now, and hopefully we're still here for a little bit. All right, with my second outright play, Spencer, go with the guy who played great golf last week, good enough to go win a golf tournament. Camilo Villegas wound up in a share of second place in Cabo last week. He's 100-1 this week. I expected, based on some recency bias, that number to be a lot shorter. So this is not necessarily a play of me saying, I think Camilo is going to go win this week. You got to play him. It's more representative of look down the board. There are some bigger numbers, triple digits, whether it's Camilo Villegas, whether it's Austin Smotherman I'm going to talk about, Kelly Kraft, who I really like this week. Jason Duffner makes some sense. Heck, if you want to get into Satoshi Kodera, I don't mind him. There's some numbers that are bigger this week that if you've got a guy you like and you say, well, in a normal PGA Tour event, I'm never going to play him outright because it just doesn't make sense for me to go after that guy. This is probably the week you want to try it just because it is an inferior field and there's going to be a chance for some of those guys who are further down the board to go win a tournament. So again, 5% of the portfolio on Villegas. He's shown in the past, Spencer, that when he gets hot, he can often stay hot. And so that's a guy that played some great golf last week, and we'll see if he can do it again. 3 for 3 making the cut in Bermuda. Let's talk a little bit about Port Royal Golf Course, 6,828 yards, par 71, just about one of the shortest golf courses on the PGA Tour that we've seen all year. And guys, that doesn't mean it's any easier to handicap. Couple stats for you. The low 72-hole record is set by Brendan Todd. That was the first event held here back in 2019. He's one of the shortest, straightest hitters on the PGA Tour. The low 18-hole score, though, Taylor Pendrith, who's one of the biggest hitters out there. A couple years ago, Brian Gay, one of the shortest, straightest guys on tour. He beat Wyndham Clark in a playoff, a guy who mashes it off the tee. Look, it ain't easy. I don't know what to tell you. You look at 6,800 yards and you go, oh, I'll just take the short guys because, they have the playing field essentially leveled a bit this week. Doesn't always work out that way. All right, Spence, let's get into the player finishing position market. We're going to buy one. We're going to sell one. Who are you buying?
So a couple things, Jason. First of all, I played by the rules this week across the board. So I am very proud of myself in that regard. Second thing, I mentioned Alex Noren one time on this show. The whole production gets shut down. That is how strict this Action Network warning is that I have not to talk about him. But I'm going to discuss somebody else for this buy and sell market. So with my buy here, I'm going to go with Troy Merritt, 45th or better, minus 120 for 20% of my portfolio. Merritt was one of the most significant value differences in my sheet for a top 20 ranked golfer in the field. There is a legitimate argument to be made that he plays better, probably as a top 10 or 20 bet, because of that built-in volatility that he does possess when you look into some of the scoring issues on the par 5 holes. Talked a little bit about how the par 3s is how you would find your high-end success. The par 5s will be where you need to score if you want to make the cut. So I think there's some built-in miscut equity here. We can talk about that in a different thing. Like obviously, maybe one of these finishing position markets isn't necessarily the most ideal location of where you would want to play him, but I think some of the impactful data looks really nice for him. He's made his past 5 cuts. He's delivered 2 top 10 showings at the Fortinet and Sanderson to begin the fall season. He has a 9th place grade for weighted ball striking. You blend that with his 4th place rank for expected strokes gained total at this venue. I think you have a really intriguing high upside golfer. I have an outright ticket on him. He didn't make it for this show on it. Did bet him at 66-1. I think in any market, whether it's a head-to-head, I think he's a little bit undervalued this week. So I like Troy Merritt kind of across the board.
Good win player as well. So I do like that. Look, it was so fun taking your guy Alex Noren earlier that I'm going to take your other guy, Thomas Dietrich, right here. You mentioned him at the beginning of the show. Bet365 has him set at 23 or better this week. He's been 2nd and 22nd in 2 starts in Bermuda so far. A guy who's shown, at least over the last couple of months, to have a very high floor. I still wonder about Dietrich's ceiling. We know that he had, I think it's 9 top 3 finishes on the DP World Tour. He's got 1 or 2 already on the PGA Tour. He doesn't win. He's never won. That said, he can come really close. The floor is high. I like him, especially in this field, to be somewhere in the top 20 this week. All right, you got to sell someone, and you're actually doing it this week. Who's that guy?
Yeah, I think we have a very similar mindset with this player. I'm going to sell Luke List 30th or worse, -120 for $19. I thought there were two players that you could make a really strong argument in imposing in this market. First is Luke List. We're going to discuss that in a second. The other is Ryan Palmer. That's a name that you're going to hear on this show again before we finish. I always view this Bet365 market as a glorified version of a head-to-head wager when we try to take on a golfer. I'm essentially looking for a combination of overpricing and miscut equity blended together. It was nice in this spot since both of those answers showed up for Palmer and List when I ran my data. However, I thought there were a few more reasons to be concerned about the profile that List is bringing to the table. For starters, my model doesn't love the inflation that we've received for a golfer who found himself ranking 94th on Bermuda courses. That price hike he has undergone is shifting him into a different expected outcome range that may not be conducive at all tracks. I do think 2024 will very likely generate a strong output for him because of his recently improved putter. That's something that I at least want to note here, but I'm not so sure if this venue has quite the makings you would want for him on this particular green complex. His 53rd place finish here in 2020, the most recent result of 45th that he posted last week. It doesn't feel like this is the stretch of golf that is quite ideal for him to unlock his full potential. I will be back in at some point. I always think of like long courses, Farmers Insurance Open, tournaments like that where he can use his length off the tee. I know you've talked about it and I agree. I don't know if there's necessarily a blueprint for finding success here, but I will say Bermuda scoring, soft, slow Bermuda greens. I think that's something that has been a high rollover predictability from year to year. And that is just an area that List is not excelling in my model in any way that I ran my model.
Are you sure they have Bermuda greens in Bermuda? Is that what we're looking at this week? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. By the way, I asked Ben Everill, my pod partner on the Links and Locks pod, if there are Bermuda greens in Bermuda, and he looked at me for a minute like it was a trick question. So I almost had him going. It's almost like you ask someone that question, you're like, wait, is it Bentgrass? Is it not Bermuda? I don't know. I'm getting just go with the easiest answer. It's Bermuda greens. All right. So first things first. I filled out my picks before you filled out your picks, and I had Luke List as my fade here. He's my sell option, and you copied me, but you spoke so eloquently and so definitively about why you wanted to fade him that I'll just go, all right, I'm just deferring to you, and I will just tell your Luke List play here. But there's one other thing I want to say about Luke, and you give all the analytical reasons. I will give the human interest reason. Here's my guess, and I haven't spoken with Luke recently. I don't know the case, but he needed something in the fall in order to keep his card and keep all the good stuff moving forward, get into some signature events next year. My guess is he set his schedule, flights, hotels. I figured it all out 2 months ago. Well, then he went and won the Sanderson Farms Championship. Now he's got everything all set, but he's also probably told the wife and kids, hey, we're going to go to Bermuda at some point. Now it becomes a little bit more of a vacation instead of a business trip. He's not going to cross it off the calendar because, hey, we've already booked everything. It'll be fun. It goes from, hey, I'm grinding to get some more status and get into some more events to, hey, let's go to Bermuda and hang out. I'm going to play golf, but we'll also have a good time there. So no stress on him this week, which that could be a good thing, but also I don't know that he's actually going in there ready to grind over 4 days as well. So let's get to our props this week. Where you going with the prop?
So the internet died the last time I talked about this player. Fingers crossed that we don't experience that same problem again. But Brandon Wu plus 500 for a top 10, $7. I considered Troy Merritt here also as a top 20. I think both of those routes are similar in expectation since we have a little of that boom or bust nature on each golfer. I decided to roll with Wu because of the better play in windy conditions and his historical performance on slow green complexes. There's a lot of volatility to begin with when you get into the potential for heavy winds added to the mix for this venue. Most of those answers just will make my model prefer some of these targets up the board, whether that's Brandon Wu here as a top 10, Troy Merritt as a top 20. There were some top 40 plays that I considered that would be a little bit lower down the board, but this is to me a dart throw where you look at a lot of these markets and you look at the way that Brandon Wu is moving in these markets. His outright price has been cut in half at a lot of the sharper books. His head-to-head matchups, he's a massive favorite in all these areas. I think he's one of the sharper plays on the board this week inside of my model. So I'm going to go for all of the upside that we can find, whether that's the 55-1 ticket that I have on him to win this, or the 5-1 number for top 10. But I think those upside markets are better than any of the safer places.
All right. So for mine, look, if you're a professional golfer who's got a pulse and golf clubs and you can get a ticket, you're probably in the field this week. If you wanted to get in this field, you're there. Johnson Wagner was on my radio show yesterday. He's like, yeah, my number actually would have come up. And I said, no, I'm working. I got stuff to do. I can't go play golf this week. So, I mean, there are guys who are just bypassing it. My boy Ryuji Amada got into this field. If Ryuji's getting in, anybody's getting in. No offense to him. That said, I think there's some value in the top 40 marketplace because there's so many guys filling out those bottom spots. And so you look at guys who ordinarily are playing on a weekly basis, are good players. I think this is a nice spot to look at some guys, as I said earlier, who you've liked throughout the year, who haven't really popped up, but guys you look at and you say they should play better than I see them on a regular basis. For me, one of the guys near the top of that list is Austin Smotherman. I think he's a really good player. Hasn't really shown it yet for whatever reasons, like just kind of keeps getting tripped up a little bit, doesn't really have the results. Maybe one bad hole here, stretch here, one bad round knocks him down the leaderboard, little things like that. But I do think that over time, he's going to be a good golfer. And I do think there's value here. He was 23rd at this event last year. Top 40, hey, it's plus 105. This is not the sexiest play you'll have on your card all week, but you're looking for some ROI. I am throwing 15% of the portfolio on Austin Smotherman. Let's get into matchups, Spencer. Where are you going with yours?
Davis Riley, minus 125 over Stuart Sink. That'll be for $41. This minus 125 number is typically my threshold price that I will lay on a head-to-head matchup. Don't really ever speak in absolute, since there's always a chance we get something outlandish offered to us at a random book. But I will say that it can quickly become a problem to your bankroll when you need to win wagers at over a 55% clip inside of these matchup markets, specifically when you have a very small edge or sometimes you don't have any edge at all. So with all of that being said, I thought this was a spot to attack Stuart Sink by taking on a golfer that my model found high corollary trends for on similar tracks in the past. My model noticed an alarming trend for Sink that has shown him drop to 112th in this field for strokes gained off the tee over his past 24 rounds. That should partially explain the 3 missed cuts that he's provided in as many starts during the fall restart. Sometimes that data can be flawed if a player is barely missing the weekend. That's not necessarily the case with him here, as he's missed his last 3 cuts by 2, 3, and 2 shots. I wouldn't say Riley is safe himself with the hodgepodge of returns that he's provided lately, but if nothing else here, Jason, I will guarantee you that this number will move more into that minus 150, minus 160, minus 170 plus range before this goes off the board. A lot of the non-bet 365 markets are already in that zone. I've recommended inside my Rotoballer article. I'm now giving it out on this show. If nothing else here, you're going to get closing line value. You can then decide how you want to handle it if the number pushes higher than I would expect it to. I just know that historically in these spots, these have been the runaway situations. Like, there was a play when Nick Bretwish came on the show 2 months ago. I had Jordan Spieth over Lucas Glover, got it at minus 115. That closed at minus 250. The bet didn't even end up winning here. I kind of foresee the same scenario coming. The win and the loss is something else that we'll figure out as this moves on. But I think this is going to be a runaway ticket that you're going to get value on the number, if nothing else.
Davis Riley struggled at times throughout this summer. I think he's past those struggles. I think he's playing good golf again. And he's a guy I've definitely got my eye on for 2024 and beyond. I'm going to go with Doug Gimme over Ryan Palmer at Bet365. I know you like this one as well, Spencer. Look, Palmer was on Gravy in the Sleeves, the show before mine on PGA Tour Radio today, and he sounded confident. He sounded like there's no pressure. He's going to Bermuda, but it's his first time there. He's usually got a little bump when it's windy. It's not going to be that windy as he might like this week. Doug Gimme is a guy that's played some really solid golf. For me, he is a floor play in every sense of the word. Top 30s in 8 of his last 13 starts. I'm throwing 30% of the portfolio on this at minus 110. And again, I do believe that Doug Gimme's got 2 chances to win this head-to-head matchup. And those are our favorite head-to-head matchup bets, when you've got a chance to win it on Friday afternoon and you've got another chance to win it on Sunday afternoon as well. And so I do think, and yeah, that's what I'm saying about Ryan Palmer. We'll see. We'll see how he likes Bermuda this week, but I do think that there's a chance this thing could be over on Friday. Okay, speaking of props, let's get to the gimme prop this week. Brendan Todd, top five, been boosted from plus 450 to plus 500. Spencer, we didn't get into Brendan Todd too much. This is the guy who, as I mentioned, has the low 72-hole scoring record in the first edition ever of this event. You jumping on for top five?
I will say this about Brendan Todd. So he was the number one player in my model for safety this week. That's an intriguing return for a golfer that has a lot of what you would expect to, or at least would want to see for a venue like this. Number 2 in weighted strokes gained total for this venue. Number 4 for strokes gained total on Bermuda. Number 2 on both strokes gained total on slow and soft greens. I think there's a legitimate reason why he won this title in 2019. The form, for the most part, has obviously been a little bit all over the place. You have the high-end results that he produced at the Fortinet and the Wyndham. You have a little bit more of those in-between results during some of those FedEx Cup events that he's produced. But I think Brendan Todd's a really good player. I think this is a really nice course fit for him. I don't exactly know where I expect him to finish. Like, we're asking a lot to finish inside the top 5, but I think he's a legitimate top 5 player in this tournament that has a real chance to win this. Like, I'm probably higher on him than you are from a win equity sense. We've obviously seen it before where he has struggled on Sunday, but we have seen him win also in events like this. So I think you kind of have to decide which end of the aisle that you're on. And this might be one of those situations that if you do want to maybe not go for the victory here, you can consider him as a top 5.
I remember Brendan Todd's first career win on the PGA Tours, the Byron Nelson back in the old TPC, and he won, came in and did his interview, and then they brought in pizza for the media as we're working on deadline, sit there and have a couple slices of pizza. All of a sudden, I turn and Brendan Todd's like, "Hey, the seat taken," sits down next to me. I'm like, "Dude, you won." He's there with his wife. He's like, "Yeah, but I like pizza." I'm like, "Well, you can go do." I'm like, "You're welcome to stay, but I mean, you won the golf tournament." He's like, "Go to Colonial next week. I got nowhere to be. I'm sit and eat some pizza and hang out." I'm like, "All right, man, sounds good." And so, I mean, he's as down to earth as they come on the PGA Tour. So, yeah, definitely like Brendan Todd. All right, first round leader play. Spencer, what you got?
I'm going to go with Andrew Novak, 80-1 for $1. I wanted to add a different name to the mix versus everybody that I've talked about of those Alex Smalley, Troy Merritt, Brandon Wu options. Those are 3 choices that I would consider also at the right number, but Novak for a round does have the potential to pop here at 80-1. My model loved how he graded for expected strokes gained total for this week's venue. That was a return that landed inside the top 10. And then it shouldn't hurt matters that he delivered additional top 20 numbers for weighted proximity, weighted scoring, and strokes gained on both soft and slow greens. Obviously, those answers seem to be what I keep going back to all the time, but without ShotLink being available, that's about 50% of my model here. You have a little bit more added to the mix when you look at, the expected strokes gained total, where I made a little bit of a mix to it, and the weighted scoring that I added, that's the other 50% that I went into it. But I do think that there's more straightforward qualities here when you do look at some of these slower properties, softer properties, shorter courses than may meet the eye. And that's why 50% of my weight's there. And it's boosting some of these guys like Andrew Novak a little bit further up the board than you would expect. I don't know if I necessarily trust him over 4 rounds, but I think for one day, he can get hot.
It sounds like you didn't really look at first round scoring average. Is that not a factor for you? Because he's way up there. He's top 10 in Thursday scoring average on tour this season.
It's not something that I particularly run in my model. I mean, I guess there's 2 mindsets there. It's one, if a player is historically doing it, obviously that's a nice indicator that he might again. The second thing would be more of my answer is that every single course is different. You have morning waves and afternoon waves and players. Like, there's so many unquantifiable factors of how a player either likes a course or doesn't like a course that I don't necessarily ever put it inside of my model. But I mean, it is nice to hear that he is producing inside of first rounds to go along with the other things. Like, if nothing else, it's a nice secondary addition to all of that.
All right, I'm going to go with a guy who, first of all, I will preface this by saying that I make all my plays on Mondays. And so for most of my plays, yeah, nothing's really going to change. Maybe a price will change a little bit here and there. But for the most part, I can make my picks on Monday. But the first round leader play, we're doing this without tee times. And so I can tell you that so many times throughout the year. I go, man, I like this guy, first round leader. And then all of a sudden, tee time comes out 2:12 p.m. And I'm like, well, I don't like him quite as much when the winds are going to kick up. I picked Kelly Craft on Monday. The tee times came out on Tuesday afternoon. He happens to be in the first tee time of the day, which, oh, by the way, Bermuda, I believe, is 1 hour east of Eastern time. And so you're going to have to wake up very early if you'd like to catch the beginning of Kelly Craft. And I think he's off like 5:50 a.m. Eastern time on Thursday morning. That said, it's going to be a hell of a sweat if he can put up a low one and sit around all day. I'll have to sweat that one out for about 7 or 8 hours after he's done. But 80-1, 67.8 scoring average in his last 5 Thursday rounds. And quite honestly, I like him for 4 rounds as well. I don't think he's just a 1-round investment. He's a guy that's very steadily and sneakily starting to make his way back to a level where he can play some really good golf. All right, real quick, one and done. What you got for one and done this week?
I'll go with Alex Smalley, 11th and 12th here in his 2 years playing this tournament. I think the added boost that he receives for expected production at the track, I've obviously talked about that quite a bit. It's very noticeable inside of my sheet. Sort of wanted to go extremely unconventional here and say Brandon Wu. Part of me would obviously like to say the Alex Norins and Thomas Dietrichs of the world. I'm going to let you have that on this show and go down that route with it. But I think this is a nice course fit for Smalley.
Yeah, I'll stick with the other Alex. I'll take Alex Noren here as my favorite outright this week. But I do think that this is a week where he certainly can pop with that short game, and the putter has been working really well over the last 6 to 12 months. Plus the fact that I don't feel like I'm using him up. If you're in a one and done for some reason that starts in October and goes all the way through next August, and you're using guys up right now, he's not a guy that next March, next July, next August, you're going to be like, oh, I wish I had Alex Noren this week. So I don't feel like you're burning him whatsoever. A quick recap of all of our plays. Spencer has Alex Smalley and Brandon Wu outrights. He's buying Troy Merritt, selling Luke List, a prop on B Wu, a matchup bet on Davis Riley, first round leader Andrew Novak. I've got Alex Noren and Camilo Villegas outrights, buying Thomas Dietrich, selling Luke List, a prop on Austin Smotherman, matchup on Doug Gimme, and first round leader play Kelly Craft. I want to thank you guys for sticking with us through the technical difficulties. Easy for me to say. Here on the Gimme, presented by Bet365. For more, check out actionnetwork.com, the Action app, this week and every other week. For Spencer Aguiar, I'm Jason Sobel. Good luck with all your bets for this week's Butterfield Bermuda Championship. Here's hoping you guys hit the green.